June 3, 1945, Philadelphia Naval Yard, 5:42 in the morning. A German woman named Anna Keller woke to the sound of chains dragging across wet concrete. For 2 weeks, every sound outside the cargo hold had meant danger. Boots, locks, engines, a hatch opening before anyone was ready. But this sound was different. It was organized, purposeful. Anna lifted herself from the narrow hammock, crossed the crowded hold, and pressed one eye to the cold circle of glass in the ship wall. What she saw on the dock did not look like victory. It did not look like revenge. It did not even look like America. It looked impossible. A woman in a dark work jacket stood beside a line of military trucks, one hand raised in the gray morning light. A driver braked. A soldier stopped talking. 2 men carrying a crate turned their heads toward her, and when she pointed toward the warehouse doors, they moved. No argument, no smirk, no hesitation. The woman checked something on a clipboard, shouted an order across the dock, and the men obeyed because the order was useful. Anna did not breathe for several seconds. She had seen women work before. Every German woman had. She had seen women carry water through bombed streets, stitch uniforms by candlelight, type reports until their fingers cramped, bury children, feed families from almost nothing, and keep whole towns alive while men explained that women were fragile. But she had never seen a woman command public space like that. Not in front of soldiers, not in daylight, not without apology. Anna Keller was 27 years old, a former radio clerk attached to a German signals office near Bremen. She had survived the last year of the war by becoming useful and invisible. Useful enough to be kept at a desk, invisible enough not to be blamed when the maps began turning red. In the world that had raised her, women were told they had a proper shape, a small shape. Children, kitchen, church. The slogan was old, but the cage had been polished until it looked like virtue. Anna knew that cage well. She could copy field reports faster than any man in her office. She could repair a jammed typewriter with a hairpin. She could memorize 6 pages of radio traffic and catch 2 transcription errors before lunch. Her supervisor once called her indispensable. Then he promoted a 19-year-old boy because the boy would one day lead men. That was the world Anna understood. Competence could keep a woman employed. It could not open the door. Now the door was in front of her, and a woman on an American dock had her hand on the handle. By early summer of 1945, Germany had surrendered, but surrender did not instantly sort the human wreckage of the war. Men and women who had served the German military machine in support roles were still being moved, registered, questioned, and held under Allied authority. Among them were women like Anna, typists, nurses, switchboard operators, records clerks, drivers, uniformed auxiliaries who had not carried rifles, but had lived inside the machinery of a regime that was now gone. More than 200 of them were on Anna's transport. They had crossed the Atlantic sick, hungry, and certain that America would punish them in a language they could not understand. Some expected prison labor. Some expected interrogation. Some expected hatred. None of them expected a woman with a clipboard to be the first crack in the world they had been taught to believe. When the hatch opened, the women climbed into the morning one by one. The harbor smelled of salt, coal smoke, wet rope, and coffee. Anna shielded her eyes. On the dock, the work kept moving. A woman in overalls guided a forklift between stacked crates with the relaxed precision of a person who had done it 1,000 times. A woman in uniform stood at a table with arrival papers, correcting a male sergeant when he mixed 2 lists together. He did not insult her. He did not laugh. He looked down, found the error, and said, "You're right. You're right." Anna heard the words through a translator and felt them strike harder than any shouted order. A man had been corrected by a woman in front of prisoners, soldiers, and dock workers, and the sky had not fallen. Clara Weiss, a nurse from Stuttgart, stood beside Anna on the gangplank. She whispered, "Do they let women do that here?" Anna kept looking at the dock. "No," she said quietly. I think they need them to. That was the first truth America taught them. Not quality as decoration, not freedom as a speech, need. The war had pulled millions of American men into uniform, and the country had discovered what every country eventually discovers when emergency strips away politeness. Half the population had hands, half the population had minds, half the population could learn. By 1945, millions of American women were working in shipyards, aircraft plants, farms, offices, hospitals, depots, rail yards, and military support units. They were not filling silence. They were filling the war. They built engines. They drove trucks. They kept payrolls balanced. They inspected shell casings. They ran telephone exchanges. They loaded cargo for men who would never know their names. In Germany, women had been praised as mothers of the nation. In America, Anna watched women become part of the nation's machinery. And the machine moved because they moved it. The women were loaded onto buses after registration at the pier. The windows were barred, but the glass was clear enough for Anna to watch the city pass. Philadelphia was not untouched by war. No place was untouched. There were service flags in windows and soldiers on sidewalks and newspaper stands shouting headlines about victory and rationing and the Pacific. But there were women everywhere. Women in factory coats walking home before breakfast. Women driving delivery vans with one elbow resting in the open window. Women standing at street corners with lunch pails. A teenage girl in a mechanic's cap carried a toolbox nearly as long as her arm. No one turned to stare at her. That was what disturbed Anna most, not the work, the absence of astonishment. Back home, a woman stepping into a man's place had to explain herself before she touched the door. Here, doors seemed to be opening and closing all morning, and no one treated the sound as rebellion. The processing center sat outside a small town in Pennsylvania, a spread of white buildings, gravel lanes, wire fencing, and low fields already turning heavy with summer. The prisoners arrived near noon. The first American voice that addressed them belonged to a woman, Corporal Evelyn Price. She was short, square-shouldered, and cleanly pressed, with a fountain pen clipped to her pocket, and a face that seemed built out of decisions. She did not soften her voice. She did not perform kindness. She simply owned the room. You will be registered by surname. You will be examined by medical staff. You will receive soap, bedding, and a barracks assignment. Keep your papers visible. Follow the line. A translator repeated her instructions in German. The prisoners obeyed. So did the male guards. That was the second truth. Authority did not have a male sound. Anna watched Corporal Price point two soldiers toward the wrong stack of forms and send them back for the correct ones. One soldier muttered under his breath. Price looked at him once, only once. He straightened. Anna felt Clara grip her sleeve. The gesture lasted half a second, but it became one of the first things the women discussed after dark. Not the food. Not the beds, not the fence, that look. A woman looking at a man as though she did not need permission to be obeyed. Inside the administration building, the air was filled with typewriters. Rows of American women sat beneath buzzing lights, building order out of names, numbers, stamps, and carbon paper. To a prisoner, paperwork can look like punishment. To Anna, it looked like power. She knew the weight of files. She knew how an index card could move a person from one category to another. She knew that a typed line could decide where food went, who traveled, who waited, who vanished. The Americans had placed women at the desks where movement became record, and record became control. A young prisoner named Ing stared at the rows of clerks and whispered, "They trust them with everything." An American woman looked up from her typewriter. She did not understand the German words, but she seemed to understand the awe. She smiled once and returned to her work. That night, the prisoners lay in their barracks under thin blankets, while summer insects clicked in the dark grass beyond the wire. For the first time since capture, they were not talking about what might be done to them. They were talking about what had been done in front of them: the dock supervisor, the forklift driver, the clerk who corrected a sergeant, Corporal Price with the pen. Each detail was taken apart and examined like contraband. Clara said, "Maybe it is only because of the war." Anna turned on her cot. "Maybe," she said. Then she listened to the typewriters, still tapping in the administration building, long after the lights should have gone out. Work after sunset, women's work, official work. The sound did not feel temporary. Anna reached under her mattress for the small notebook she had kept through the Atlantic crossing. She wrote one sentence before sleep took her. "I have seen a door opened from the other side." And once she wrote it, she knew she could not pretend she had not seen it. The days that followed did not give the women time to recover from that first shock. They were assigned work details outside the camp. Not dangerous work, not punishment work, practical work, the kind of work the war had made necessary everywhere. One morning, Anna, Clara, Ingie, and 30 others were driven to a farm owned by a woman named Miriam Wade. The road bent through a valley of barns, rail fences, cornfields, and pasture. To Anna, the landscape looked too wide, too bright, almost indecent after Europe's ruined closeness. The truck stopped beside a red barn where a tractor sat with its hood open. A woman stood on an overturned bucket with a wrench in her hand. She had gray at her temples, grease on both forearms, and the steady balance of someone who did not wait for work to become convenient. The American guard called, "Mrs. Wade?" The woman did not look up from the engine. "East rose first," she said. "Then the lower field before the rain." The guard wrote it down. Anna watched him. He wrote it down. Miriam Wade's husband had been drafted in 1943. Her oldest son was in the Navy. The hired men were gone, the horses were old, and the county office still expected crop yields to remain steady because soldiers overseas did not stop needing food. So Miriam learned the tractor. Then she learned the accounts. Then she learned to argue with seed suppliers. Then she learned which men in town would overcharge a woman unless she met their eyes and named the correct price first. She did not describe any of this as courage. She described it as the year the work did not leave. The German prisoners were given gloves and sent into the rows. At first they moved stiffly, waiting for insult, waiting to be reminded that they were prisoners and women and enemies. Miriam did not waste the energy. She showed them how to pull weeds without tearing the young roots. She corrected bad work. She praised clean work. She ignored fear unless fear slowed the row. Near noon, rain clouds gathered beyond the barn. Miriam climbed down from the tractor, checked the sky, and said, "Corn never asks who holds the hoe. It only shows whether the row was done straight." The translator gave the line in German. The field went quiet, not because the sentence was beautiful, because it was dangerous. At home, every task came with a story attached. Men's work, women's work, honorable work, improper work, work that proved obedience, work that threatened order. Miriam had stripped all of that away. There was the row, there was the hand, there was whether the work was done straight. Nothing in the soil cared about the slogan. That afternoon, Anna found herself working faster. Not because she wanted to please the Americans, because for the first time in years the judgment felt clean. The row did not know her history. The row did not know what uniform she had worn. The row did not ask whether a woman should be strong. It simply recorded the truth of her hands. The factory visits were worse. The farms had shocked them with physical authority. The factories shocked them with scale. On certain work details, the prisoners were driven past plants where the doors stood open in the heat. Inside, women worked under lamps, beside drill presses, cutting tables, gauges, belts, and suspended metal. There were men there too, but the women were not visitors. They were not helpers holding tools for someone else. They were inside the work. One evening, the truck slowed near an aircraft parts plant. Through the open loading bay, Anna saw a woman in goggles guiding a sheet of metal into a press. Another checked measurements with a caliper. Another marked a crate bound for an air depot. Inge leaned forward until her forehead touched the glass. "They are building the weapons," she said. "Not cleaning them. Not blessing the men who used them. Building them." That distinction changed the air inside the truck. The German state had never been shy about using women's labor. It used women ruthlessly. But it wanted them near power, not inside it. It wanted the work without the recognition, the discipline without the authority, the sacrifice without the credit. America had not solved that contradiction. Anna could see that much. Women still served coffee to men who made larger decisions. Women still disappeared from some conversations the moment the uniforms became expensive enough. But compared to the world Anna had known, America had made a wartime bargain with reality. If the rivet held, it held. If the truck arrived, it arrived. If the ledger balanced, it balanced. If the tractor started, it started. The proof was material. And material proof is hard to silence. By that summer, the numbers were everywhere, if a person knew how to read them. Women made up roughly a third of the American civilian workforce. More than 6 million had entered paid jobs during the war years. Hundreds of thousands served in uniformed auxiliary branches, clerical corps, medical units, communications offices, and transport roles. Aircraft plants, ordnance depots, farms, telephone exchanges, and federal offices had become classrooms in a lesson no government had fully intended to teach. Capability, once demonstrated at scale, is difficult to push back into a cupboard. The prisoners learned this not from lectures, but from ordinary scenes. An American woman signing a delivery sheet, a woman in boots changing a tire while 2 boys watched, a woman counting payroll aloud while a man waited for her answer, a woman saying, "No, that price is wrong," and watching the salesman redo the math. Clara began keeping a list. She wrote down moments that would have been impossible at home. A woman eating alone in a diner, a woman disagreeing with a town official, a woman laughing loudly without covering her mouth, a woman driving after dark, a woman being tired and still not asking forgiveness for taking up space. By the 3rd week, Clara had 3 pages. By the 5th, she stopped numbering them. There were too many doors. The darkest moment for Anna did not come at the fence. It did not come in the fields. It came in a kitchen. The camp had begun allowing selected prisoners to help local families with domestic work on Sundays and certain afternoons. It was practical. Labor was short. Houses were full of children, ration books, repairs, grief, and men coming home changed or not coming home at all. Anna was assigned to a woman named Nora Caldwell, a schoolteacher whose husband had returned from Europe with a limp and a silence that sat beside him like a second chair. Anna expected humiliation. Instead, Nora opened the door and handed her a dish towel. "Come in," she said.
"We can finish faster together."
Together. The word almost irritated Anna. It sounded too easy. Inside the Caldwell kitchen there was a stove, a radio, shelves of jars, a table scarred by years of use, and 2 children doing arithmetic homework under the window. Nora's husband sat at the table with a newspaper folded beside his coffee. Nora corrected one of the children's fractions while scrubbing a pan. Her husband asked whether the school board had approved the autumn repairs. "Not yet," Nora said. "Mr. Avery wants to delay again." "Can he?" "Not if I bring the parents." Her husband nodded. "Then bring the parents." Anna dried a plate and nearly dropped it. There had been no permission in his voice, no annoyance either, only the practical acceptance that Nora had a public fight to handle, and it was hers. A few minutes later, their daughter, a serious girl of 12, announced that she wanted to design bridges. Nora said, "Then you had better learn geometry properly." Her father said, "And steel." The girl looked pleased. No one laughed. No one said she would grow out of it. No one said bridges belonged to boys. Anna turned toward the sink so they would not see her face. That was when the damage became visible. Not the damage America had done. The damage she had carried into the room, All the small lessons from childhood. Do not speak first. Do not contradict a man in public. Do not want too loudly. Do not sound too sure. Do not stand in the doorway as if the room belongs to you. Do not become so large that someone has to cut you down. She had mistaken those lessons for manners. Now, in a stranger's kitchen, listening to a girl claim bridges, as if the word were sitting on a shelf waiting for her, Anna understood that the lessons had been locks, and worse, she had helped guard them. She remembered her younger sister, Elise, drawing machines in the margins of church bulletins. Anna remembered laughing with the others when an uncle said, "Careful, the girl wants to be an engineer." She had not meant harm. That did not save her. Some cages remained standing because the prisoners learned to repair them from the inside. That night, Anna did not join the barracks conversation. She opened her notebook and wrote for nearly an hour. She wrote about the dock, the field, the factory, the Caldwell kitchen, the girl who wanted bridges. Then she wrote one line and scratched it so hard the pencil tore the paper. "I was not only kept small, I was taught to keep others small too." After that, the story changed. Not outside. Outside, the same routine continued: work details, roll call, meals, letters, rain, heat, the distant sound of trains at night. But inside the barracks, the women stopped asking whether American women were unusual. They began asking what had been stolen from German women and renamed nature. Clara said she would return to nursing, but never again let a doctor speak over a patient who needed her. Inge, who had been a switchboard operator, said she wanted to work in a post office, then maybe in radio if the stations reopened. Another woman, Johanna, said she had always wanted to study law. The barracks went quiet at that. Law sounded enormous. Johanna looked embarrassed for 1 second. Then she lifted her chin. "I know," she said. "That is why I said it." The door had opened. Now they were beginning to name the rooms beyond it. In autumn, the repatriation lists began appearing. Names typed in columns, dates, transport numbers, ports, medical notes, clearances. Anna saw her surname in black ink and felt the old fear return. America had become less frightening than home. That was the private shame of it. Home meant ruins, hunger, missing men, suspicion, silence dressed as tradition. Home meant mothers who had survived by lowering their voices. Home meant girls who might still be told that obedience was their best hope. Home meant doors that had been rebuilt as walls. On her final Sunday with the Caldwells, Nora gave Anna a small packet wrapped in brown paper. Inside were 3 things: a recipe for cornbread, a pencil, and a brass key from a broken pantry lock. Anna looked at it, confused. Nora said, "It does not open anything now." Then she smiled. "Maybe that makes it honest." Anna closed her fingers around the key. No speech could have done what that small, useless object did. A key that opened nothing was still a reminder of what keys were for. The ship left in February 1946. This time the women stood on deck. They had crossed the Atlantic once as prisoners of a defeated country. They crossed back as something harder to classify. Still prisoners in paperwork, still marked by war, still guilty in ways some understood and some avoided, but no longer sealed inside the same idea of themselves. Anna carried 4 notebooks, 2 English newspapers, the brass key, and a list of promises she was afraid to make but more afraid to abandon. The ocean was gray. The women were quiet. Clara stood beside her at the railing. "What if it cannot be done there?" Clara asked. Anna watched America disappear into fog. "Then we will know what they are refusing," she said. That answer frightened her, because knowing is a burden. Before America, a closed door could be mistaken for the edge of the world. After America, a closed door was only a closed door, and someone had decided to close it. Germany in 1946 was not a country returning to normal. Normal had burned. Cities were broken open. Rail lines ended in rubble. Families searched lists for names that never appeared. Millions of displaced people moved through stations, roads, camps, and ruins, carrying bundles that looked too small to contain a life. The old regime was gone, but the old habits had not surrendered at the same time. Habits rarely sign documents. Men who had lost everything still expected authority to sound like them. Women who had kept families alive through bombing and famine were still asked to step aside when rebuilding became official. Anna returned to a town outside Bremen where half the school roof was gone, and the municipal office smelled of damp paper. Her mother was alive, her father was not. Elise, the sister who had drawn machines, had survived the war working in a laundry. She had stopped drawing. For 3 days, Anna could not bring herself to show Elise the notebooks. The gap between what she had seen and what stood in front of her felt too large. Then, on the 4th day, Anna found Elise mending a sleeve by the window. A coal shortage had made the room cold. Elise's fingers were red. Anna took out the brass key and set it on the table. Elise looked at it. "What is that? Proof," Anna said. "Of what?" Anna opened the first notebook. Of a door. She began with the doc, not the ideology, not the war, not America as a perfect country, because it was not one. She began with a woman on wet concrete raising one hand and stopping a truck. Elise listened without moving. When Anna reached the story of the Caldwell girl who wanted bridges, Elise's eyes filled. She looked away quickly, as if tears were another thing that required permission. Anna did not comfort her. Some grief deserves the dignity of being left whole. Within a month, Anna took a clerical job at the local education office. Within 3, she was arguing over school records, roof materials, and the enrollment of girls whose parents said they were needed at home. She did not win every argument. She did not win most of them. But she had learned something from Corporal Evelyn Price. Authority is partly posture. Not arrogance, not shouting, posture. The refusal to shrink before the sentence is finished. When a town official told Anna that advanced arithmetic was unnecessary for girls, she asked him whether the new Germany intended to rebuild its bridges with only half its children able to calculate weight. He stared at her. Then he changed the subject. Changing the subject was not victory, but it was movement. Clara returned to a hospital ward and was reprimanded twice for correcting a doctor's medication note before it harmed a patient. The 3rd time, a senior nurse stood beside her. Then another. Inge found work with a postal exchange and began teaching younger women how to handle switchboards and forms instead of simply filing them behind men. Johanna did not become a lawyer, not immediately. The universities were crowded, damaged, and difficult, but she found a legal aid office near Hamburg and spent years helping widows, displaced families, and former workers fill out claims in language they could understand. None of this looked like revolution. That was why it lasted. A revolution in a speech can be burned. A revolution in a habit is harder to find. The women did not return from America carrying banners. They carried procedures: how to speak in an office, how to ask for records, how to read a budget, how to correct a man without first apologizing for the correction, how to teach a girl that her question was not rude simply because it was exact. In 1949, when Germany's basic law declared that men and women had equal rights, the sentence did not magically change daily life. Sentences on paper rarely do, but paper can become a doorframe, and women across the country, famous and unknown, began pushing against the boards nailed across it. Anna was not one of the famous ones. No statue carries her name. No documentary photograph freezes her in a heroic pose. She reopened records. She reopened classrooms. She reopened possibilities in sentences so ordinary that many children did not know they were receiving anything radical. Show your work. Ask again. Use the ruler. Do not lower your voice when the answer is correct. For 31 years, Anna Keller taught and administered in schools rebuilt from broken brick and borrowed chairs. She kept the brass key in her desk. When girls were told they were asking too much, she sometimes placed it on the table between them. She never explained it the same way twice. To one girl she said, "This opens nothing. That is why you must." To another she said, "Someone made this for a lock. That does not mean the lock gets the final word." To Elise's daughter, who wanted to study engineering in the 1960s, Anna said nothing at all. She simply gave her the key to hold during an entrance interview. Years later, after Anna died, a box of her papers was found in a school storage room during renovation. Not hidden dramatically, not sealed in a wall, just waiting in a cardboard box with her name written in fading blue ink. Inside were attendance ledgers, ration-era school forms, letters from former students, and 4 notebooks from America. Between the notebooks was a small booklet, stitched by hand, 16 pages, no title. On the first page, Anna had written, "For the girls who are told the wall is natural." The booklet did not describe battles. It did not describe generals. It described ordinary American women doing ordinary things with an authority Anna had once been taught to consider impossible. A woman correcting a sergeant, a woman repairing a tractor, a woman signing a payroll sheet, a woman telling her daughter to learn steel, a woman bringing parents to a school board meeting, a woman handing a former enemy a dish towel and calling the work together. At the end of the booklet was a sentence copied from Anna's last American notebook. The handwriting was smaller there, careful, as if she understood that simple words would have to carry what speeches could not. The world may call a door a wall for 100 years, but if you have seen the handle turn, you owe the next girl the truth. That is the part of this story that matters. Not that America was innocent. It was not. Not that wartime opportunity solved women's equality. It did not. Not that every woman who returned home became free. Many did not. The point is sharper than that. Propaganda depends on isolation. It tells people the room they are in is the only room ever built. It says the locked door is not a door. It is nature. It is order. It is decency. It is the way things have always been. And then one morning, at 5:42, a prisoner looks through a porthole and sees a woman on a dock raise her hand. A truck stops. Men listen. The world continues. That is how the lie begins to die. Not all at once. Not loudly enough for history books. But in the exact private second when a person realizes that what she was taught to call impossible is already happening somewhere else. Anna Keller did not bring home wealth. She did not bring home power. She brought home the memory of open doors, and memory, when it is specific enough, becomes a tool. A tool can be passed hand to hand, from a dock in Philadelphia to a classroom outside Bremen, from a woman with a clipboard to a girl with a geometry book, from a useless brass key to a generation that learned to test every wall for a handle. That is why the story survived. Because the women who returned from America did not have to imagine freedom from nothing. They had seen it in ordinary life. Wet concrete, grease on hands, a school board meeting, a dish towel, a child saying she wanted bridges. And once a door has been opened from the inside, it is very hard to convince the people who saw it that it was ever a wall.